Good evening, everyone. I'm Danny Hozak. I'm chairman of the Economic Education Association and president of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to join us in our Wild Rose Coffee Room. This is a joint project between the Economic Education Association and the Wild Rose Party, and so we're calling it Wild Rose Talk. And so here we go. We're really thrilled tonight to have. We're talking about educating folks, and we're in a group of people that are working towards having a referendum on independence and winning the referendum and then developing a new country. And we're absolutely thrilled tonight to have a fellow who has spent about 5 days. He's a world-renowned heart surgeon. He spent about 5 days a week for the past 30 or 40 years operating on people and doing heart surgery and saving lives. And now our guest, Dr. Dennis Modry, he's retired, and so now he's working 7 days a week. He's not just trying to save old people's lives; he's trying to save the future of young people. So, Dennis Modry, welcome to our show.
Nice to be here, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. As you know, a few minutes ago, we were having a little trouble making my microphone work, and I said, "Well, Dennis, I might need those paddles. Like, can you do it over the phone?" He said, "No, but if you have some, I could tell you how to use them." So, in any event, we got my microphone working. We're ready to go. Dennis, as I said, Dennis, how many years did you do open heart surgery, and how long did you do that, Dennis?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if you include all of the time that I was operating, even in training, where you do 90% of the cases, it's a lot. But in the 32 years where I was actually formally operating as a fully trained and certified cardiac surgeon, it was about 32 years.
Well,
being an active practice.
Good for you. Well, you've saved a lot of lives, and I thank you for that. As you know, we worked together on our first Wild Rose Party on the policy thing, and at one point I was traveling with a friend, and we agreed to meet in a restaurant in Edmonton. And I hadn't told him who I was meeting, and we sat down and I said, "Oh, this is Dr. Dennis Modry." And as you know, he just opened up his shirt in the restaurant and said, "Oh yeah, I know you. You saved my life in 1998. So I don't know how many people, but I know a lot of people who you've saved their lives. And I thank you for being here with us. And so let's get right at it. Are you the executive director of the Alberta Prosperity Project, or what's your formal title with the Alberta Prosperity Project?
Well, just basically to understand the structure, we incorporated the Alberta Prosperity Society in February of 2022. Might have been January 31st even, but it was right around that particular time. And we have a board of directors for the Alberta Prosperity Society. And like I say, it's registered with Service Alberta as a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational society. And we have a board of directors, and I chair the board of directors. And the society itself, with the board, governs the Alberta Prosperity Project. And of course, that project is to educate the Albertans and anybody who's interested across Canada on the rationale and merits of Alberta sovereignty. The chief executive officer of the project is Mitch Sylvester, a businessman from Bonnyville. That's the structure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've been doing a tremendous amount of work on this. And when I first talked to you, like you had just submitted the question to Elections Alberta, and we had agreed that we would talk about, the fact we had assumed that they would have approved the question. And then we were going to talk about how you were going to go about organizing, getting all the signatures that it took, which is a monumental task to get the signatures to force the referendum. And then we would talk about your plan to move forward with actually winning the referendum, and then further to that, moving forward to creating, having the first government in a new province or in a new country. Having said that, as I think a lot of people know, and our viewers are soon going to find out, Elections Alberta, for some reason, referred the question to the courts. So I guess we might as well start with what that means and how you think that fits in to your plan. So you want to just bring us up to date on where we're at with the question being referred to the courts?
Sure. So the question that's been referred to the court is a question regarding Alberta becoming a sovereign country and ceasing to be a province of Canada. And the question itself that we proposed is, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada? So that's a very clear question. And the issue with respect to its referral to the court is an interesting one, just from the point of view that we expected that it would be approved because it is crystal clear, and the wording comes right out of the Clarity Act, which is the legal pathway as defined, consequent to the Supreme Court's analysis of the Quebec secession reference in 1995. And so the wording is crystal clear. There's no question about the wording. So why did the chief electoral officer refer it to the court? He referred it to the court because in his mind, in relation to the Citizens Initiative Act, there is the potential, obviously, to change the Constitution. So it is a constitutional question. And by its very nature, the fact that a referendum could be held that could lead to Alberta leaving Canada means that Alberta would be removed from the Constitution. And so the chief electoral officer wondered whether or not the question itself breached any areas or any articles within the Constitution Act 1982. And so that's where we are right now. And it is kind of an interesting process. There are pros and cons to this. The con is that we would have liked the question to be approved. And that may be the conclusion of the judge next Thursday. That could happen. In which case, then we're on our way to collecting 177,000 signatures on a petition in support of the question that I just stated. And that speeds things up because there's no question that we will be successful since we already have over 250,000 people registered, having registered their contact information with the intent to support the petition that forces the referendum. Now, you could say the con would be in all of this. So in other words, that would be a good thing for us because we're all ready to go. We have 20,000 volunteers. We have 97 regional leaders throughout the province, with numerous chapter leaders underneath those regional leaders, all set to go to set up the process to garner the signatures. So we can, and we have 120 days to do it. So we would like to be able to get on with it.
Well, Dennis, how about if we let's assume that the judge is going to say the question is fine, let's get to work.
Right.
And let's go through let's assume we're going to get to work, because obviously, like if he doesn't like the question, well, then we're into another discussion, and maybe we could have you come back and talk about, okay, they've thrown a curveball at us, or they put up a roadblock or whatever, and this is how we're going to deal with that. So do you think that's fair?
There's even a benefit. There's even a benefit if to us, and I'll talk about that in the event that the judge decides that we need to go ahead with having intervener status. And there's a term, I'm just blocking on it right now, where the judge can ask for help himself from other judges or lawyers with respect to dealing with this issue. Amicus curiae is what it is. So he can ask for amicus curiae, which is himself getting information from sources that he wants to acquire information. But to answer your question, to go forward, what happens if we are able to go forward because the judge states that the chief electoral officer, his request is denied for intervener status, or for the judge to make further rulings, and we are in essence able to proceed. So under those circumstances, we would expect that, let's say we are able to start, so next Thursday, and let's say the following week, maybe the 10th or the 12th, under those circumstances, the chief electoral officer is now obligated to approve the question. And then we have 7 days to get we'll have more than 7 days, but within 7 days, we have to start collecting signatures on the petition. Okay, so that means, of course, that we have to have our commissioner of oaths in place as well. So that might take a little longer than 7 days, but that's okay. We have a number of commissioner of oaths ready to go, because they have to certify each petition document that is collected by a certified canvasser approved by Elections Alberta. So then we're in a situation probably around mid-August that we start collecting petition signatures. So we go 120 days, so mid-August to mid-September, mid-October, mid-November, mid-December. And at that point, we know that we will have the signatures required. In that 120-day period, the Chief Electoral Officer at Elections Alberta and his team will certify the signatures as being valid. And then once that is completed, then the valid petition is transferred to the provincial government, and the provincial government then hands it off to the lieutenant governor for approval, and then the government itself will hold a referendum at a time of their choosing. So we were expecting that the provincial government would hold the referendum in the spring, or at the latest during the municipal elections, but we really don't want it to be approved. We don't want it to go ahead at the time of the municipal elections, and I can explain why. But before we get to that point, let's just assume that we have a standalone question and a standalone referendum, for example, in the spring, May, June of 2026. And if the referendum is successful in the sense that there is a clear majority voting in favor of the referendum, then at that point, the provincial government will enter into negotiations with the federal government and the other provinces. And the federal government and the other provinces are obligated to negotiate in good faith with Alberta. And the thing about the Clarity Act, which I find interesting in this context right now, we're at a point where we've had a successful referendum. The federal government, provinces are obligated to go negotiate with Alberta in good faith. The interesting thing that I find is the last line of the fourth paragraph of the preamble, which states negotiations might lead to secession. This is a very important point, because the corollary is negotiations might not lead to secession. Well, what does that mean, actually? We know that the Premier said she would honor the result of the referendum. Okay, well, that's fine. But if she goes down the rabbit hole of negotiating with the federal government and they can't come to a deal, what happens? Does that just mean it all ends? Well, there's another solution here. And the other solution is to look at the Supreme Court's analysis of the Quebec secession reference, which led to the Clarity Act. Now, that analysis is supreme to the Clarity Act, so it has more sway than the Clarity Act itself, is what I'm saying. Section 154 and 155 are the two key points to solve this potential impasse where the provincial government and the federal government and the provinces can't come to an agreement. And we have every expectation that they can't. I mean, if you look at Bill C5, the way it's set up, there's all kinds of new barriers, as you can well understand, that can lead to an impasse. So Section 154 of the Supreme Court's analysis of the Quebec secession reference states this, that a people are entitled to seek sovereignty as a nation if they've had a colonial experience in which they have been subjugated, dominated, exploited, and their self-determination inhibited. Okay, so you can ask the question, has Alberta's tenure in Confederation been at all subjugated, dominated, exploited, or has our self-determination been inhibited? And I think there's not only evidence for each one of those points to justify proceeding to a referendum, which we have already acknowledged has been successful. Then Section 155, based on international law, states that even though a province doesn't have the unilateral right to secede from Canada, that is secede, which also means the corollary is succeed as well. But what I'm playing with words here. So in other words, not only as a result of a successful referendum does a province have the right to leave Canada, I'll use that term, but when it is acknowledged by other countries in the world, then regardless of the fact that the province doesn't have the unilateral right to leave, there's really nothing that the federal government can do if the province of Alberta makes a declaration of independence based on that successful referendum, and the United States and other countries acknowledge that Alberta is a sovereign country. There's not much really that the federal government can do. And so what we're hoping...
Could I just say one thing? Like you sort of said, well, we're sort of playing on words, and it said it may lead to cessation. And even our dear friend Michael Wagner at one point, he said, well, you know, if there's a successful referendum, it doesn't mean they'll leave. They may just get a better deal. And I think knowing you and knowing the people that are talking about independence, we're saying if anybody wants to offer us a better deal, you need to offer it before we vote, because when we vote, if we get 50% plus one, we're leaving, and the only discussion will be what we're taking and what we're leaving behind. But we're not, the discussion and the negotiation won't be whether we're going to leave or not. It'll be like under what, like we're leaving, it's under what terms we're leaving. Is that fair to say?
Well, it is fair to say, but I think that it's important to recognize that the provincial government under the leadership of Danielle Smith has far more power following a successful referendum in which she states, and she's had communications with the United States, for example, and the United States says to the Premier, we acknowledge already, and this is day one or day two after a successful referendum and the votes have been counted, okay?
Yes.
If she says, as a consequence of hearing from the US, we acknowledge Alberta's successful referendum, and we support your unilateral declaration of sovereignty. And then under those circumstances, on day two or day three, following a referendum, she could declare Alberta as an independent country with international support for that declaration. On the other side of the coin, she could try and go down the rabbit hole of negotiations. But I think, Danny, you and I know that for Alberta to achieve the objectives that it really would want for sovereignty, and that's not just economic sovereignty, it's cultural sovereignty, it's religious sovereignty as well, it's regulatory sovereignty. So this is really important to understand as well, is that, you know, what we worry about is the Premier could say, well, we got one or two pipelines approved and that's it. But that leaves out a whole lot of other important issues that are of value to many Albertans, to the majority of Albertans, I would say. And that is their individual right to pursue a future, you know, unencumbered by, you know, excessive regulation and taxation by the federal government.
Well, not to mention mass immigration as well. Like, I mean, like we haven't been included in the discussion on any of these issues. And I mean, but anyway, like Bruce Party was on a couple of weeks ago, and he said, like, really, like the mass immigration, like the federal government has just totally and consistently and repeatedly, like, pretty much stuck their finger in our eye as far as what would be good for us. But anyway, carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, with respect to immigration, you know, we've shared a document entitled "The Value of Freedom" document, and there's a comment, a very extensive comment in there about immigration. And believe it or not, you know, the analysis in that area on immigration actually follows Canadian law, where you assign a certain number of points for having certain attributes that make you a desirable individual to come into Alberta. In other words, the ability to actually contribute to the development of Alberta, and also embracing Western values, which is critically important as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I said this to Bruce Party last week. And like I said, Alberta is not opposed to people coming to Alberta to make Alberta better. And when you look at our, like, for thousands of years, you know, the left mocked our tar sands by calling it the tar sands. And for thousands of years, it was tar sands till people from all across Canada went to Fort McMurray, and somehow they figured out how to get tar out of sand. And now it's one of the miracles of the modern world. But it wasn't just done by Albertans. It was done by Canadians who came here to make Alberta better. And I think I know you well enough to know that we're all welcoming people from Canada who want to come here to make Alberta better. But we don't want them to come here and bring, you know, what's wrong with the rest of Canada to Alberta.
Yeah. Well, you know, Danny, it's one of the things that I find really interesting right now is we've had input from across Canada. There are many, many people who really don't know what to do. They find themselves in the same sort of dilemma that we have articulated. But they haven't developed a structure yet to do anything much about it. But the fact that the kind of support we're getting from across Canada leads me to believe something that I've articulated some time ago, and that is saving Alberta may well save the rest of Canada as well. And Bruce Pardy has taken it to an even another level, and he said saving Alberta may just save Western civilization as we know it.
And I don't think that's an understatement either. I really don't. And I think, and I commend him and I commend you for what you're doing. Like, I mean, I don't know how you find the energy to do all that you're doing, but I certainly appreciate that you are.
Well, you know, it is time consuming. There's no question, but you know, everybody finds something to do in their retirement, right? And
yes.
I think it's the sort of thing when you stay intellectually active and physically active, you live longer as well. And I think there's something to be said for that.
There is, and it's a better life too. When people tell me they're not interested in politics, I always say, well, actually, my grandpa wasn't interested in war either, but he still went twice. And to me, you're fighting. I'm doing my best to help. Like the Prosperity Project, we're fighting today's war for future generations. We truly are. Like this isn't really about you and I. It's about our children and our grandchildren and everybody who's watching. It's about their children and their grandchildren and their future. So, you know, carry on like that. Like we just have to win, as our hockey friends always say.
I know, but I'm going to add something to what you just said there. There's no question that we're doing this for the future as well. But you know what, Danny? You and I are part of that future. And the people that are living that are of our vintage are part of that future as well. And we all can benefit. You know, I mean, let's just say we have the successful referendum in 2026. And by 2027, or even at the end of 2026, we've had a government that has the courage to stand up for Albertans based on a successful referendum and to declare ourselves a sovereign country. And we get on with the business of doing what we need to do, retaining all of the wealth that we transfer in taxation to the federal government. We retain it here. We repatriate the funds for the pension plan. We repatriate, we end any further contributions to the federal government whatsoever. And we embark on reducing people's provincial taxation to zero, and corporate taxation to maybe, 8 to 10% max. And then we look at as opportunities that will flood this province, because as you know, as a business person, business will always relocate to the least governed and regulated region in the world, or at least one of the least governed and regulated. I think we can be the absolute least governed and regulated because of our massive wealth. So the opportunities here are just so massive. And, when people oppose it, they oppose it obviously not because they've understood the benefit. They don't want to support Alberta's sovereignty based on ideological reasons, and they don't even have an interest in looking at what the benefit would be to them. But despite their opposition, a successful referendum on sovereignty and Alberta becoming a sovereign nation, they can't help but be benefited economically and socially in every other way.
Yeah, some of these independence people remind me of the Ronald Reagan quote where he said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble; it's what you know that ain't so." You know what I mean? And like a lot of these people just have no idea of how much better off they would be. But having said that, you're doing a good job. Your group is doing a good job of going around and pointing that out. Like, how many thousands of dollars per family is it? Year after year after year, we're into our 30th or 32nd or 33rd year of, what is it, $10,000 per family, like that we're sending and we're not getting anything back for. So when you look at what that could do in Alberta, certainly we'd be down to zero tax pretty quickly, wouldn't we?
Well, we would. The Fraser Institute came out just a few weeks ago with some interesting statistics, which was the average Canadian pays $48,000 in taxes every year. So what we would be proposing is, since you'd be paying no federal tax, corporations would pay a 8 to 10% tax, but on a personal basis, within a year or two, you'd be down to 8 or 10% maximal instead of 48%, and within a year or two after that, it would be zero. So I mean, the benefit to families, just in terms of the ability to purchase the goods and services that they want, is one thing. But what about planning for the future? What about young people, graduating from college, high school, and a trade, being able to purchase a home and have it paid for by the time they're 28 or 30? I mean, these are things that used to be the case, for young people.
I know, and right now, as as Mr. Elbows Up was campaigning, they're talking about, like, young people at the rate he's taking our country, or the direction he's taking our country. There's no hope of some of these young people getting a home. So you're right. The entrepreneurs will be coming to Alberta. They'll have an opportunity like we've had for generations here. We just have to. You're right. We've still got lots of productive years ahead of us where we can hopefully be involved in this process. So let's assume that you get the signatures. Then you've got an army of people that are going to go around. Now, like, people are asking me, like, how are they going to get the signatures? And I said, well, I assume, like, if you've signed your original email, that you'll send out an email to the people in Lloydminster and say, like, our signature collectors are going to be at the Lloydminster Mall on Monday and Tuesday. Please stop by and sign the actual referendum. Are you doing it somewhat like that, or how are you going to do that?
Exactly. So like I said, we have 97 regional directors and a whole bunch of chapters leads that represent all towns and municipalities throughout the province. And what will happen is that, at least in the beginning, there will be sites set up where people can come in that's convenient to them to sign the petition. And where it may be difficult for people to get to a location, then, because we have the contact information for everybody, we can send a canvasser out there to get their name, get their petition signature.
Yeah.
So that's the way, and like I say, we're all set to go. And I don't think it'll take, we have 120 days to collect 177,000 signatures. And like I said, we've got well over 250,000 registrants already, and thousands and thousands and thousands of other people that are supporting us. But, because of cancel culture, they're uncomfortable to register their contact information with us. But they would sign a petition, for example, and they would support a referendum. But they don't really need to be. We try and explain to people that as a private society, we are obligated not to share the contact information from anybody. So we don't do that. We don't give our contact information to a soul. So we keep their names confidential. So, but still, people, may have had their accounts frozen from the trucker convoy era, and so this cancel culture is still well and entrenched in society still. Yeah,
that's one of those things. Like I said, the only good thing about difficult times is the chance to find out who your friends are. And when you see how the federal government treated the truckers and Tamara and some of them, you know what I mean? To me, that they were doing, in retrospect, they sort of did us a favor, because it sort of, I think it galvanized our support for saying, okay, enough's enough. We're leaving, like, we're getting out of here. And one of the things that I've had a few people say to me, well, you'll need more than 50% plus one to actually leave the country. And I've been saying, no, that's what it says, 50% plus one. That's how democracies work. And I hope we're convinced that that's right. Like 50% plus one is the number we're looking for. And if we get it, then we're leaving. Okay. Well, fair enough. Now, a couple of weeks ago, you came out with I guess a draft budget for the first few years or whatever. And one of the things, if I'm not mistaken, you said that essentially the government would carry on the way it is, for the, what would it be, a year or two as we work through the transition to a separate country. How does that actually work? Like, I mean, everything doesn't just stop the day you vote. Like, the government has to keep doing what they're doing. So over time, you would switch some of this stuff over. How does that work?
Well, there would be a transition process, and the value of freedom document doesn't necessarily define how the transition works. It defines the difference between the way things are now versus what the economic circumstance would be subsequent to Alberta becoming a sovereign country. The transition process would take place based on, I don't know if you can hear that.
Is that thunder and lightning?
No, it might be hail coming down, but I've got a skylight in the ceiling of I'm in a sunroom kind of office.
That's okay.
So I don't know if you can hear it rattling.
I can hear it, yeah, but we've been praying for rain for 20 years, so I hate to complain when it's raining. Carry on.
Sure. So what I was going to say was we've been working on an interim constitution, and that interim constitution is being revised yet again. Okay, so we haven't released it to the public yet, but the idea, Danny, is that subsequent to a declaration of sovereignty, there would be discussions that would occur with the federal government on numerous particular issues. One of the very first things is that what would happen is that there would be advice given to the public and corporations registered in Alberta to cease the transfer of any taxation to the federal government. So, and there would be the development of, we already have a corporate tax collection unit in Alberta. So that would be expanded to include personal income tax for a period of time as we take control of Alberta taxation. And under those circumstances as well, obviously there would be a lot of money that would not be going to the federal government. We're talking about in the first year, there would be the retention of some $70 to $75 billion. That's what we give to the federal government on taxation now. And we get back around 30 billion of that. So 30 to 35 billion to $40 billion would be extra money that we would have. And so you can see how quickly it would be possible to reduce taxation. Now, one of the things that you see in that value of freedom document is what the cost for us to take control of various things. And so even if we netted 30 billion and all of that, there's a transition process as you take control of this, that, and the other thing through negotiations. But the Premier's hand would be much stronger if right at the get-go, following a successful referendum, she declares Alberta as a sovereign country with support from the US and other nations. And this is the sort of thing that has to be set up before the referendum. We've already set that up with the US, but I don't know if the US has spoken to the Premier yet. They did speak to Jeff and I when we were in Washington on April the 22nd. So now I mentioned the interim constitution. The interim constitution helps to define how the transition will occur. But it also sets the stage for having a full constitutional conference in which all interested parties come together and define what the final constitution should look like for Alberta. And in that process, you're transitioning. You're already transitioning in a direction towards the interim constitution. Then that final constitution defines what the end point is going to be like. But at the end of a constitutional conference, you have to submit that constitution to the public to vote on. And, we're all about this being a populist movement, and we want the public to weigh in, which is why, for example, the document on the value of freedom says open for public discussion. And it'll be the same thing for the interim constitution, open for public discussion. And it sets the nation for the final constitutional conference. So
certainly, yeah. As you know, like John Robinson had done some work on a constitution. I guess that was a revamped constitution for Canada, but Bruce Party has done a constitution. If you remember, Serious About Leaving organized a constitutional weekend in Lloydminster. I would say that was 3 or 4 years ago. You were there, if you remember. Paul Heyman was there. Art Hanger was there. There was 30 or 40 of us spent Friday, Saturday, and Sunday working through a draft constitution. So these aren't things like you fellows have really done your homework. Like, and there's it's like, well, they say like there's an awful lot more goes on behind the scenes than what you see. Like everybody sees you going to driving 200 miles to a meeting for 3 hours, and then driving home at the night, but they don't see you getting up early in the morning working on the Constitution either. But like a lot of that groundwork has been done. But you're right. Like we will need a founding convention or something, once that starts. Now, having said that, one of your documents that came out, a few weeks ago, Jeff Rath announced, how your plan, his plan, somebody's plan for dealing with the First Nations, and you know what I mean, and also carbon sequestration, giving them land to help them sequester carbon. Well, one of the things that Bruce Party said is like how we've dealt with the First Nations and sequestering carbon are two of the I would call it embarrassments with the way our country is running. Like I don't know if you were there, but in January of 2020, Danielle Smith facilitated a Future of Alberta conference in Calgary. I don't know if you were there or not, but if you remember, she had a panel. She was talking to Chief Boucher from Fort McKay and Chief Willie, I can't think of his last name, from Ermiscan. And she said, what do you think about an independent Alberta? And they said, oh, absolutely not. And she said, well, I'm surprised, because she said a lot of people don't think the federal government treats people right, but we pretty well all agree that they don't treat the First Nations right. So what would possibly make you think that the new country of Alberta would treat the First Nations worse than the old country of Canada? And they both just sort of got a sheepish look on their face and said, I guess we'd never really thought about it. So that's clearly an area where, we'll have to have some heart-to-heart discussion, I guess, about how we move forward. Am I fair? Particularly on the carbon sequestration, because if surely to goodness we can leave that behind in our new country.
Yeah. Well, let me touch on the First Nations issue, because I think this is an important, very important point. And if you listen to the court proceedings last Thursday, a lot of weight was placed on the issue of First Nations and treaty rights and that sort of thing. Now, I think that it's very important to understand that there are some First Nations chiefs that are definitely opposed to Alberta becoming a sovereign nation, but there are others that are very supportive of Alberta becoming a sovereign country. I think for those people who are opposed, they've got to look at themselves in the mirror and explain how maintaining the current system is beneficial to First Nations when you look at life expectancy, for example. The average life expectancy for non-Indigenous people in the province of Alberta, non-First Nations people in Alberta, is 82, okay? The average life expectancy for First Nations people is 19 years less. Think about that, 19 years less. There are still communities that don't have fresh water, all right? Now, there's a number of reasons that you can point to, which, we don't need to get into vilifying anybody right now, except I would say the federal government has not looked after First Nations properly. If they had, they would have the same life expectancy that we do. And so I think the arguments that First Nations people advance is that we need to protect the environment is not an argument that holds water in the context of losing 19 years of life. All right.
No, you're absolutely right. Like
Notwithstanding,
what we're doing, sorry, but what we're doing isn't fair to them. It's not about money or anything else. It's not fair to them. Like some of our dearest friends are First Nations, you know what I mean? And we
Yes.
live right by Onion Lake, and we have dear friends, and like it isn't fair to them.
no, it isn't. And there is an opportunity here. And, you know, the rest of people who, the people in Alberta who are not First Nations or are not Indigenous, they don't want to foul the environment either. They want sustainable development in which the environment is protected, but the environment is used to benefit all people in Alberta and elsewhere in the country as well. So using the environmental argument as a bludgeon to prevent development doesn't hold water anymore when we can look after the environment. And yeah, I mean, regulations are important, but regulations need to be, you know, put in the right context of benefiting everybody, and that includes First Nations, to get them out of poverty. Because, you know, I mean, let's look at it. For a couple of hundred years, you know, from whenever the British monarchy have been controlling what happens in the region of Canada, and has been, you know, subjugating, you know, the Indigenous population as they have been. They're still subjugating the Indigenous population, despite the amount of money that is given to them. And you know, that money that is given to First Nations people is not very well audited, as you know, Danny. And so there are many First Nations chiefs that are brilliant and have done a great job, but there are some that have not done such a good job, and you have to ask why. And
yeah,
you know,
just like mayors of some cities have done a good job and mayors of other cities haven't. Like you're right, but you're right. Some of them have done, like Chief Boucher, and then there's the fellow from Kelowna. Like they've just, like their businesses are absolutely. At the last time I heard Chief Boucher, you will speak, I think they paid $90 million in income tax in the 1 year. You know, I mean, it seemed like a fairly good business to me. You know what I mean? And he said there are people who were working and they were productive, and it's all. So yeah, they need to be a vibrant. Like I'm a part of Michael Binion's Modern Miracle Network, and like we always say, the left use the First Nation as pawns and props for their left-wing ideology, and the right, the conservative, you know, entrepreneurial people, they look at the First Nations as partners in prosperity. And I mean, that's what we want them to be, is partners in our prosperity.
Right. And so it does bring up something that I think I want to touch on, and that is when you look at the proposals for First Nations, for the Indigenous population in the Value of Freedom document, it looks as though there's a lot of money being given. But the idea behind that is as a transition to help move First Nations, all First Nations, not just the ones that are doing well, but particularly the ones that are not doing well, and to get them to a point where their life expectancy is on par with non-Indigenous people. Now that's going to take a generation or two to get there, likely, but not the transition period. The transition period can be put in place earlier, within a few years, probably 5, maybe 10 years. So there's a transition period in which money has to be spent in this context. And for those people, and this is the important point I want to get to, there are a lot of people that are not happy about the fact that Indigenous people don't pay taxes, or not all, but on reservations they don't pay taxation. Well, remember what I said earlier. the ability that Alberta has because of its fiscal capacity over a period of time, well, instantly you'll be paying no federal taxes when Alberta becomes a sovereign nation. But within 2 years or 3 years, Albertans, non-Indigenous people, won't be paying taxes either. Now you've created an equality here of taxation. And I think that makes it a lot more comfortable for people. We want First Nations people to participate in the development of a sovereign country. We don't want to alienate them. We want them to be equal participants. We make them equal participants because they pay the equal amount of taxes, which is zero, right? So,
Absolutely.
So that's the context in which you have to think about it. Not that they're, and I know the feeling. I mean, I've had that feeling as well, that they're privileged, and as a result of being privileged, they've become dependent on the federal government because of that privilege.
They're pretty much the poster childs for that old joke, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Like you look and you think, okay, maybe they've been helped the most by the government and they're the worst off, which I think makes the point that we're trying to make in Alberta is we want to have a smaller government where the people aren't depending on the government to make their lives productive or whatever. And I mean, certainly the other place that we haven't touched on is the health. And I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr., who I didn't used to, admire as much as I do now. And now that I've found out about sugar and how hard that is on your health, you know what I mean? So there's a whole host of things as a society. As you know, I sort of got my political start in the beef industry. We spent 50 years fighting Health Canada's don't eat beef, you should eat more carbohydrates. Now we've got an obesity problem, and all of a sudden some of the world leaders are saying what you need to do is eat more beef. There's my little plug for our few Angus cows right there, is we need to eat more beef and less sugar. And so, we all need to strive to be healthier. And I mean, certainly, like I say, that's another place where we can help the First Nations as well, and not just because we're helping everyone with that.
Well, I'm actually, being in the medical profession, I'm actually quite excited about the opportunities here for the Indigenous population and for the population in general. You could add, lessening your sugar intake to also lessening your salt intake as well. That'd be another area. But in any case, we won't get into all the health stuff right now.
Maybe we'll have you on for some health advice next week or in a month. But anyway, let's get out of the country first, and then that'll probably help all our emotions anyway. So fair enough. Okay, well, do you have any last, I'm pretty comfortable with what you've had to say. We've got a pretty clear plan. I mean, I guess if the judge says, we do have a few minutes left, unless there's some questions, which I don't see any questions in the chat. So what if the courts sort of throw you a curve on the question? I think we've got a few minutes. You could touch on that if you want to, unless you had something else that we were on that you would like to finish up on.
Well, you brought up the issue of CO2, didn't you?
Yes.
So let me just touch on that for a second.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really big topic, really. So go ahead. Yes.
It's a big topic because it's actually just taking money and burning it. It's just taking money and throwing it away because it isn't going to change anything. And what I find quite maddening is that the federal government wants to create this technology to suck CO2 out of the air. And, the engineers and the contractors, are going to make a fortune off of this technology that will do nothing to change the climate. But it will definitely benefit the companies, particularly Brookfield, Carney's company. And I find this maddening, particularly when we understand, if you look at the Pathway Alliance website, I think the number that they quote to do this in Alberta is $16 billion to create this technology. That's $16 billion of taxpayers' money. Now, But I've been told by someone involved with the meetings that that number is closer to 50 billion. But whether it's 16 billion, 30 billion, or 50 billion, it's a waste of money, and it's not going to change the climate. But what I find even more maddening is the oil companies have developed technology. It's called carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery technology. And it's used to increase oil production from existing oil fields by injecting CO2 into the reservoir. And then it's trapped, but you get more oil generated. So it's a win-win for society. They've already developed that technology. It's there. So this sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere to benefit Brookfield and the shareholders is not something that I think the Alberta public, when they really understand the waste of their tax dollars, they're not going to support it. And then it brings up the other point. As a sovereign country, there will be no tax dollars available for that kind of technology. So you see how silly it is to develop this carbon dioxide capture and sequestration when we have a better, already paid for technology at hand, which will do a better job than this technology that they're planning on capture and sequestration. I mean, it's maddening to think about it. It's so stupid that it's
even. I don't want to get your blood pressure any higher than it may already be, but I guess you've got paddles there if anything goes wrong. But it's even worse than you're saying, because these oil companies are using the CO2 what they do, they put it down in the field, it causes more pressure and it pushes the oil out and they can get it out of the field. But it doesn't qualify for the CO2 sequestration money because they're actually doing something productive with it. So you actually have to waste the CO2 sequestration money to get it from the government, just like windmills and solar panels. Like, I mean, talk about an experiment in idiocy. Like, we've certainly had our share of all three since we heard from the Trudeaus, haven't we? And now Mr. Elbows Up seems to be every bit as bad.
I think it's a dangerous situation that we're in, and I don't know Mr. Carney, and I understand that he has certain values, but they're not necessarily values, I think, that many Albertans, and perhaps maybe even the majority of Albertans, embrace. And rather than get into the details on that, let me leave you with a positive note.
Good.
I touched on the issue of cancel culture earlier. In relation to polling, the polling has been as high as 45 to 48% in favor of Alberta sovereignty. But I think because of cancel culture, we're not getting a true picture of how Albertans really feel. And just as a thought exercise, and I think, Danny, you and I may have touched on this, but if you consider the 2021 referendum on ending equalization, and 62% of Albertans wanted to end equalization, voted in favor of it, could that same 62% be also in favor of Alberta sovereignty if ending equalization is the only way to get there? And I don't have any evidence to prove that. It's just an interesting thought exercise, which makes me think that we may be closer to a plurality than people think, or have a greater significant plurality than people think.
I think we are, Dennis. And there's two things. For one thing, I think a lot of people who work for the government are sort of worried about, I don't exactly know what they're worried about, but one of the things that I think that's important, if we take control of all these things, there will be a lot of people working for the government. They may be switched from one department to another, but we will switch a lot of jobs from Ottawa to Alberta. And so if there was 20% of the bureaucrats out of that, 38% that didn't vote to change equalization, a lot of them, if they get thinking about it, I'd actually like to be in my own country, so we didn't have some of these problems we're talking about, and I would probably have a job working in immigration or border inspection or whatever. So I actually think we could do better than the 62%. We were at the thing where Martin Armstrong was speaking in Calgary a few months ago, and he started right out. He said Alberta will be an independent country in just a few years, and he said once you get to 30%, he said it's like a wildfire. You can't hardly put it out. You know what I mean? And so that's where we're at. And maybe I'll just leave you with one. I'll let you say. Was that your closing comment, or did you have one more closing comment just before I have one little story I want to tell?
Well, the only closing comment that I would have is don't be fearful of the negative comments about Alberta sovereignty. Do your homework. Look at the Value of Freedom document as an example. Look at our website. Talk to people from the Alberta Prosperity Project or the independence parties who have a great deal of knowledge with respect to the benefit. And just remember that what does freedom really mean? It means freedom from persecution. And it's when you say what kind of persecution? Well, economic, political, religious, cultural, and regulatory persecution, where you can thrive and your family can thrive and future generations can thrive far better than the current circumstances. Don't be afraid. And nobody is the devil in the sovereignty movement. Nobody's a racist. Nobody's a pedophile. Nobody's, all these negative terms that people are throwing at people who only want freedom and prosperity.
And we want it for everyone as well.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're absolutely right. As you know, we spoke at an event that Todd Beasley organized in Brooks, a month or two ago. There were 6 or 7 of our groups, different groups, and we said, look, let's remember we're all fighting the same war, but we can't all be at every battle together. But let's remember that we're all on the same side. Help where you can. Encourage the people you can. If somebody's saying something that bugs you a little bit, don't worry about it. Let it go. We're all trying to move the ball forward. And I just wanted to. You talked about, the Americans, acknowledging our sovereignty. And some people say, well, if you vote on independence, like Canada would send in the army. And I said, if I have anything to do it, and since I know you, we could probably ask you to go back to Washington. But if we were going to vote on independence, I'd like to send somebody to talk to Donald Trump, about a week before the vote. And then the night before the vote, he would tweet out, hey, Mark Carney, I understand Alberta's, voting on independence tomorrow. And then in capital letters, he would put, don't make me come up there. And so I think, I hope we can vote on independence while Donald Trump is still the president, because I don't think he would come up here unless we asked him to. So anyway, thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for taking an hour out of what I'm sure has already been a long week to share with us. And we'll look forward to talking to you in the near future. Okay.
Thanks, Danny. Great.
Thank you, Dennis. I'll let you go, and then I'm going to say I'm going to encourage people to donate money, but I won't ask you. So I'll let you sign off, and then I'll ask everybody who's watching to donate to keep us in business. Okay. Thanks for your time. See ya. Thank you, folks. That was, now we know where we're at. You can see, I have tremendous admiration for the work that Dennis and his team have been doing. And there's a whole lot of things going on behind the scenes where they're working on things that will need to be looked after. So good for him. So as we keep going down this road towards independence, we're going to keep trying to have these podcasts every couple of weeks. One of the things that Bruce Party mentioned, and they've came up again tonight. It's the CO2. Certainly CO2. It's increasingly clear that it was just an absolute money-sucking hoax for the government to take money from ordinary people that with no possible benefit for anybody in the real world. And of course, the First Nations is an issue that will have to be dealt with. They're like everyone else. They'll have one vote. And if we decide to leave as a country, I assume they will be involved in the we'll have a founding convention of our new country. So we talk about how we move forward. So, but in the next in our series, I'm hoping that Michelle Sterling will be on 2 weeks from tonight, she's done a lot of work talking about what a hoax the CO2 thing is, and she's also, I think, one of the best informed people in basically in North America, talking about she calls it mass non-graves. Some of the controversy over residential schools. Some of it is absolutely just fiction. It's sort of like this. Some are like the CO2. But anyway, there's a certain amount of fiction in certainly in the mass graves thing, and the CO2 hoax it's all fiction for that matter. But in any event, thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. It'll be up on our Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition website. You can just go there. You can click on it. You can watch it anytime. Please share it with your friends. Please ask your friends to be involved. I mean, and this is like I said when I was just saying thank you to Dennis. The group of us that were in Brooks, there was Link Byfield was there, Corey Morgan, Dennis, Todd Beasley, myself, and I'm sorry if I'm forgetting someone else, but we're all working towards Michael Wagner. We're all working towards independence. You can see I have Michael Wagner's 2 books up on behind me. One is No Other Option. The other is Time to Leave. I think if you want to be a well-informed, proponent of Alberta independence, I advise you to get those 2 books and read them and understand them, because he takes all the what about this, what about that questions that people ask, and he answers them in a down-to-earth, common sense way that makes them really understand. And of course, his last book that he's written on this issue is It's Time to Leave, which I think we all agree that it is. And sometime in the next couple of weeks, maybe in the next month, I'm hoping to have Corey Morgan on as well. He has a book as well. It's called the Sovereignist Handbook, and I'd like to have him come on and talk about that, because he's another fellow who spent a lot of time thinking about how we bring an end to this abusive relationship that we call Canada. So thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time to be with us for a Sunday evening, and we'll be back 2 weeks from tonight. Thank you very much.